Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Talbot, Managing Director and Head of Research here at Red Cloud Securities. I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on uranium today. We are going to hear from EnCore Energy Management, including Bill Sheriff, Executive Chairman, and Paul Goranson, their CEO. Now, during today's webinar, they will provide an overview and outlook of the company, and then we'll take some questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. But before we kick things off, first I need to discuss the fine print. During this EnCore Energy presentation, forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to their forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of the EnCore corporate presentation, and that can be found on the company's website, EnCoreEnergyCorp.com. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell securities, and we note this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud webinar website for specific disclosures on EnCore Energy. Now, before Paul and Bill step up, I would like to say a few words. The nuclear industry continues to strengthen. There's 443 reactors in operation. That's about the same as 10 years ago. But global uranium demand is up to 177 million pounds and growing at between 2.5% to 3% per year. There are 53 reactors under construction. China plans to quadruple nuclear capacity by 2030. India plans 21 new reactors by 2031, and Japan is still targeting 20 to 22% nuclear power. There are many countries entering the sector, and about 1/3 of all new reactors are being built by Russia. What has changed this time around is the world is focused on lower greenhouse gas emissions. Biden's recent $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill made it clear that American nuclear power needs to be leveraged. The U.S. is building a couple of reactors, and 20% of its electricity comes from nuclear, but we'd argue that isn't enough. So bottom line, we do like the fundamentals that is driving the uranium price higher. With disinvestment in the uranium sector, there has been a lack of exploration and discoveries over the past several years, and new mines will be needed in the coming years to replace mine closures, let alone cover the demand in uranium. So uranium prices, they have been rising largely on the back of physical demand, but we don't believe $47 a pound is yet high enough to incentivize the required new bill. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul and Bill to update the company, update our audience on the company. Guys?
Thank you, David. I'm Bill Sheriff, the Executive Chairman, and I will guide you through the first part of this, and we'll be joined by Paul Goranson, our CEO, who will take you through more of the details of what we're doing now and our future plans. Just by note, the UK is also building nuclear reactors. My background is compliments of the Hinkley nuclear power plant as they're putting the containment dome on. Anyway, EnCore is devoted 100% to in-situ recovery of uranium in the United States. We've developed an elite team to accomplish that goal, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. We do have forward-looking statements. I encourage you to read through the disclaimer. And just to give you a little snapshot, the company is just recently gone through a offer with Azarga Uranium to combine the two companies. Their shareholders have affirmed that with better than 99% approving it. And now we're in the closing stages of that transaction. So all of this will be pro forma based upon the two companies together. We do have 2 licensed processing plants in Texas, 2 of only 11 in the United States. We have turnkey production capability in Texas thanks to a merger a year ago with where we acquired the assets of Uranium Resources in Texas. With that, we also get considerable assets in Texas in terms of resource, as well as a huge endowment in New Mexico. The advanced stage Dewey Burdock project was one of the Azarga assets that's coming in. It's very advanced in the permitting pipeline and one of the best ISR projects in the U.S. Another pipeline project is the Gas Hills in Wyoming, and we will begin aggressive permitting on this once the merger ink is dry. Putting the two companies together, our measured and indicated resources of 90 million pounds, another 9 million or so inferred. And we do have a program where we are going through and updating our historic resources, which measure almost as much, and moving those into the 43101 category. In fact, there's 2 43101s underway now, and we will systematically go through the other projects in the portfolio and bring those up to current standards, roughly 1 a quarter, but at least 3 a year going forward. The company is well positioned to benefit from the nuclear renaissance, of course. First time in 50 years since 3 Mile Island that the U.S. has bipartisan political support, as David touched on. And again, management and team, technical team is our biggest strength at EnCore, and it'll help us tremendously as we move into very short-term production. Just a little bit of a review. The last and most sustaining uranium rally of the last 50 years occurred between 2005 and 2008. And that was really a supply constraint, perfect storm. Was not so much demand driven. And that makes it very different than the current cycle. The company's basically patterned on energy metals success from the last go round, where we did 5 mergers and or acquisitions, major acquisitions in a 30-month period, becoming the largest resource holder in the U.S. before selling out to Uranium One. EnCore was born, as you can see, in about 2010, right before Fukushima. So we sat and had a 10-year hiatus, and we're basically on care and maintenance during that time, trying to preserve cash. About 18 months ago, we decided we'd seen sea changes coming to the market that have been validated since, and we began our recruitment for a new CEO, and we were very fortunate after a global search to bring Paul Goranson in, who you'll hear from in a bit. He's had an illustrious career dealing in the U.S. with just about every ISR plant that's been here, career with Rio Algam, president of Cameco, et cetera, but well equipped to lead our team through this next prolonged decade or more of expansion. The company, combined with Azarga, will have a pro forma of about $20 million cash and a market cap of somewhere approaching $500 million. That is inclusive of the 100,000 pounds of physical uranium inventory that we'll maintain as a minimum. That does fluctuate based upon our available cash and our take on the spot market. The 100,000 pounds minimum, or whatever inventory we might have, is there primarily for a buffer between when production commences and when we reach full commercial scale production, so that we will be able to easily fulfill our contracts as we build up to full scale production. Might also mention that we are making an application to NASDAQ, and that will see our liquidity and our exposure to the financial markets greatly expanded. We'd expect to see that towards the end of the year, first part of next year. In terms of the board, it's called quite an active board. I'm just going to mention a few of these. Paul already indicated his great background. Dr. Stover is one of the 2 inventors of the in-situ process and has 6 patents to his credit. Richard Cherry, 40 years in the business, and one of our marketing experts, formerly president of General Atomics, very, very strong career there. Mark Paliza, 40 years in the ISR business, about half of that in permitting, half of it in operations. Bill Harris comes to us from his past position with Energy Metals, where he came on board to help us through the Sarbanes-Oxley requirement when we listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Sandy McKay will be joining us from the Azarga board, 20 years as minerals or extractive industry legal experience, 10 of that as Chevron Canada's lead counsel in Canada, and about 10 of that in the uranium business. Blake Steele, the current CEO of Azarga, will join us as a strategic advisor, primarily in charge of liaison with the Asian markets, where he's developed a great following. And of course, as David also touched on, really the heart and soul of the growth in the industry coming up is going to be largely based in China and Russia. So having his contacts over there will be invaluable. We also, I might mention, have 20, 25, 30 people in the field in Texas, engineers, geologists, and staff that are working actively to upgrade the Rosita plant and put us in a good position to go into production. Our property position, what you see outlined in yellow here, are the principal uranium producing districts of the United States. These projects in yellow or green are the ones that the combined company will host. From north to south, the more important ones, Dewey, Burdock, right on the South Dakota line with Wyoming. Central Wyoming is the Gas Hills project. Then you come down and you see a cluster of assets in northwest New Mexico. New Mexico is the largest district historically and current resource of any state in the U.S. All told, close to 1 billion pounds, including what's been produced. We're in this district, about half of that remaining. This is going to take longer term, but we do have substantial assets there, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. You also see in South Texas a major cluster of assets, and this is, of course, where we'll start our initial production, where our licensed plants are. The real key takeaway on this slide is the last bullet point, and this is that Texas and Wyoming are agreement states. This is really important because you don't deal with the NRC. Essentially, the federal government has conveyed their regulatory authority and responsibility to the state, and you have basically one window permitting. It greatly streamlines operations and reduces your cost in these two states in particular. Utah has it as well, but Utah to date has no ISR operations. I won't read through all these headlines. Suffice it to say, we really are in a unique opportunity, first time in 50 years where we've got full wind in the sails. Bipartisan support in the U.S. It's the only thing the two parties agree on other than disagreeing. Obviously, you just can't get to green energy and carbon-free electricity without invoking nuclear power at this point. Wind and solar just are not able to do it. In fact, much of Europe is already going away from wind and has experienced a great deal of problems with that. So nuclear's got a very bright future. David had mentioned the aggressive build-out plans. This number of 154 was before China's updated number that they're adding, and this does not include the small modular reactors, which will be a significant addition as well. Suffice it to say, we're going to see over 30% increase in demand over the coming decades, and that's against a backdrop of current deficit, 55 million pounds between primary supply and current use. So it's really a demand-driven market this time with a supply constraint that's fundamental and not due to any unique situations such as weather. Should provide a very, very good backdrop for ever-expanding prices in the uranium. And that is without the impact of Sprott, which has certainly come and absorbed a great deal of spot market surplus, and the announcement of Kazatomprom of a similar fund that will now make the world's largest producer not reliant upon utilities to sell their uranium, but they also have the ability to sell it to the financial fund that they are founders and part owners of. So it really does give a backstop to their commitment to much higher prices in uranium. For those of you not familiar with in-situ process, and this is the only process we intend to use, we have no open pits, we have no underground excavations, no tailings ponds, no tailings dams. Very, very ESG sensitive, if you will, very environmentally friendly. Basically, we take oxygenated water and inject it into the formation where it traverses laterally through the formation hosting the uranium, dissolves the uranium, where it is pumped up through a production well and run through essentially a municipal water plant. This removes the uranium, collects it, concentrates it for further processing. The stripped water is then refortified with oxygen, re-injected, and the process continues over and over. This is a very efficient method. 57% of the global uranium is produced this way, although much of it in foreign lands uses acid injection. We do not do that in the US. You cannot fully reclaim an acid-injected ISR. And so we're favored with the oxygenated water, much easier to clean up. Much lower CapEx, much lower OpEx, and obviously much lower permitting cost as well as reclamation cost due to the environmentally superior method as you can envision. So what are we doing at EnCore currently? The Rosita plant in Texas is about halfway through its modernization program. We're on time, on budget, and on schedule. Should have that finished up in the second quarter of 22 for a cost of just under $1 million. We've been on a very aggressive campaign for Texas assets that are established in terms of their resources, many of which have been permitted in recent years and have been largely forgotten. And we're in the middle of that. We'll have news on that once we get that tidied up. But for now, it's a bit of a competitive situation. So we keep the details out of the public realm at this point. Wellfield drilling is currently underway at the Rosita extension. Here again, this drilling is under an area that is permitted at Rosita. And that has just commenced. Paul can give you some more details on that. The 43-101 resource estimates, as I mentioned, are being updated on a systematic basis. And we've just initiated our first non-core asset divestment. Recently, Evolving Gold and Elephant Capital entered into an RTO agreement. We will end up with 20% of the post-funded company and have board management and rights of participation going forward. This was on a conventional asset that we had not even mentioned in terms of our public disclosure because it never was core to us. We have a number of these assets that we think will be able to arrange similar deals on going forward, put them into a sound company with good management and let them advance them on their own while we concentrate on our in-situ programs. We're also, in spite of 2 mergers in 12 months, still evaluating further growth opportunities, be they private, public, or some combination thereof or partial, and would expect to see additional activity in that arena. Sort of a quick glimpse of our plans for possible production. Texas is 2023, South Dakota's 24, 25, probably the end of 24, first part of 25. Wyoming's a year later. Roughly, could be 15 months. And New Mexico is 5 to 7 years out. 5 is a very optimistic case, more likely 6 or 7. The state is not an agreement state. It's much more stringent in terms of its permitting requirements. And in addition to that, there's also an Aboriginal situation or concern that will have to be addressed. And that involves education and participation. And we've already begun the groundwork on that, but have considerably more in front of us. With that, I'm going to invite Paul to join us and take you through the individual assets and return for question and answers. Paul?
Thanks, Bill. I'll just kick it off with Texas, which is our near-term production opportunity. We're looking to get into production by 2023. And the way we're doing that is we're leveraging the existing Rosita processing facility we acquired from Westwater. But we also have the Kingsville Dome processing facility, which we're maintaining as a production option. In addition to the work that Bill mentioned about the advancement of wellfield development at Rosita, we're also advancing development at a project we call Upper Spring Creek, which is actually a combination of 2 properties that have been previously licensed and permitted. But during the last price cycle, the bear market, long-term bear market, the private company that operate or held these licenses and permits and the properties have dropped them all. We've picked up that through our database that we acquired from them, and we've also acquired the key properties that currently are needed to restart these projects. So we've actually started, in addition to acquiring the properties, we've started the permitting process as well to restore those permits and licenses that were in place just a couple of years ago. And so that's, along with the work we're doing at Rosita, is going to advance to get the Rosita processing facility into production by 2023. And we're focusing on Rosita because it's fairly centrally located to those properties I just described. We're also continuing to increase our property holdings in Texas, with particularly focusing on known mineral resources that can be brought into production relatively quickly. And we believe that there's a tremendous amount of upside. At the moment, we don't need to do any greenfield exploration. We have enough that we already have identified to provide a significant pipeline to feed our current production facilities. Let's see. And that's focused on, like I said, on South Texas. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see a photograph of Rosita. The facility was pretty much rebuilt back in 2008, got to about 95% complete before work was stopped due to market conditions. And what we're doing is we're completing that work, but also modernizing Rosita to current industry best practices. And this will allow us currently to be able to produce up to 800,000 pounds per year, but we can easily upgrade that or increase the size of that capacity, both at Rosita and Kingsville, using existing infrastructure that was installed earlier back in 2008 and 2005 at Kingsville, respectively. And those are going to leverage us to get to increase our production as we bring on these additional properties. And we'll be doing these as satellite ion exchange facilities, where we're actually doing the ion exchange recovery out at the well fields and then transporting the resin back to the central processing plants for ultimate yellow cake production. And with the Westwater transaction, we also acquired 8 1,000 GPM or gallons per minute ion exchange plants that we can easily relocate. A good picture of one right there that's a 1,000 gallon per minute plant in your lower right-hand corner. Those can be easily relocated for relatively low cost CapEx. So what we're focusing on is low CapEx entry into production and sustainable production. And in South Texas, because of the environment and everything else, our operating costs are relatively low, as well as even in an increasing cost inflationary cycle, we're in an area where costs still remain relatively low compared to what you see in some of the other areas in the country. So we're looking to continue to focus on being a low-cost producer. This is some of the work that's ongoing at Rosita. This all should be done by the end of the first quarter for less than $1 million. And once we get Texas into production, we'll be advancing the Dewey Burdock project into production. And that's because it's what I would consider to be an advanced project. It already has its federal licenses and permits. There's some court work that has to be done, as well as the state permits have to be completed as well. And we've kind of budgeted in an 18 to 24 month window to get all that work done. So that times perfectly with the execution of our plans in South Texas to allow us to be able to begin development of Dewey Burdock. And this is a project that has, as you can see, has very good known mineral and measured and indicated resources. Plus, there's tremendous upside, both adjacent to the Dewey Burdock project in South Dakota, but also across the state line in a property called Dewey Terrace, where we see a tremendous amount of upside. So once we complete the transaction and close, we'll also be looking to spend some money on advancing Dewey Terrace and another project nearby called Aladdin to increase the production, the productivity and production pipeline out there. And as you can see, the economics remain relatively robust with Dewey Burdock, and that's simply because of the quality of the ore body, as well as the operating costs. And we expect this robust economics to last, even though we currently are talking, you're hearing the news about inflationary activities, but coupled with the increasing price of uranium that we expect to see over the next couple of years, Dewey Burdock will be a very good project to kind of fit that wedge in between our Texas operations and ultimately getting into New Mexico. And coupled in that, to expand our production pipeline is Wyoming. Right now, Gas Hills is considered with respect to its 43101 and recent PEA, Gas Hills is the most likely candidate to be the next one to come in as soon as we get Dewey Burdock up and operating. It's not nearly as advanced. It needs to have its permitting and licensing done. Again, that's all with the state of Wyoming because it's an agreement state. And it's also in the brownfield area in the Gas Hills and adjacent to Cameco's Gas Hills ISR project. So we see this as being a good potential future pipeline project that will begin to start the permitting work, building up the permit documents right after we get done with closing. And again, a recent PEA done just a few months ago shows it's got very good, robust economics. And we expect that to be sustained going into the future. And all this leads us to New Mexico, where where EnCore currently holds over almost 50 million pounds of inferred and indicated resources, and probably as much an equal amount in historical mineral resources going forward. And the other important part is that there's quite a bit of an amount of blue sky. This is why the effort that Bill talked about earlier with going to the regulatory process, but also doing the community work, the critical community work in the tribal communities to bring about a social license to operate is so critical, but also well worth it. And that's simply because of the upside sitting at New Mexico. The State Geologic Survey estimates over 400 million pounds of unmined mineralization that has been identified and characterized and placed in the various projects. But as you can see from the checkerboard on that map, we also hold significant amount of properties that have known mineral intercepts and mineral characterization, but it's never been put into a project or brought into any kind of mineral resource database. And so we believe that there's a tremendous upside, and one could easily see where that number of unmined mineralization could increase more than double as a result of that. So it's a very good long-term company project area that we dominate based on our land position. And but it is going to take some work to get there, but we believe the ultimate goal is well worth that effort. And one of the first projects we expect to happen is an ISR project called Crown Point Hotz Butte, where we control the bulk of the minerals going forward. We expect that to be one of the first movers. All said, we're building what we believe is a premier ISR uranium development company in the U.S., and we hope, and a near-term producer. We want to be one of the first movers in this industry as the market begins to improve as far as being a new producer. With that, we'll be able to leverage our pipeline of advanced projects going forward, and kicking that off with the 2 production facilities we acquired in Texas gives us immediate access to markets in the short term, and ultimately getting us to a point where we can leverage our long-term land position in New Mexico. We have a strong team with a lot of experience, not just including me, but our technical team as well, both engineers, geologists, and operators. But also with the Azarga transaction, once we complete that, we'll be bringing on board another set of experienced people into the group, giving us what I believe in the U.S. side, one of the deepest bench strengths from an operating perspective going forward. And that allows us to leverage what we believe is a successful long-term pipeline of production, but also leverages from a market strength when we get to consolidation going forward. We believe that there's more consolidation needed in the U.S. to be competitive globally, and we're continuously looking for those opportunities as we've just demonstrated over the last 12 months. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul and Bill. Great presentation. So we're now going to kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. Reminder to everybody on the line, you can type your questions into the text box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. So we already have a few questions here. When do you anticipate the Azarga merger to be completed? And maybe could you walk us through the steps remaining before close?
I can take that, Bill.
Yeah, you're involved with that.
So right now we've got with the shareholder vote completed, we've basically set the path going forward, and we have a couple of regulatory processes we have to go through. There's the court that has to approve the actual merger. We expect that this week, hopefully, and then ultimately we have to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to consent to the license, the indirect transfer control of the license. And that's a regulatory process. It's expected to take a fixed time, but we're basically on NRC schedule. We're managing that through working with the staff as well as NRC management to get that done as quickly as possible. As far as to how that looks as far as timing, we're looking for the end of this month, but given the fact that most of November is almost over with, that it may be sometime in December, but we're relying on others to make these decisions. So we've got good people working on it, and not to pat myself on the back, but me too. But I see it progressing as we expect.
I point out that NRC is perfunctory largely. It's essentially a little more than a change of address. It's not something that is in contention in any way.
But they do have a process they have to follow.
Yeah, no, that's normal course of business for acquisitions in this sector, and you guys have done this many times.
Yes,
before as well. So, okay, now that you brought Dewey Burdock into the fold, how do you prioritize the projects in your pipeline?
Well, as I mentioned, is that we're still continuing advancing Texas, and we'll continue to work and expand Texas going out. But Dewey Burdock's critical for filling that gap between our long-term vision, which is New Mexico, or long-term productions vision, and but Dewey Burdock's critical. We're going to advance as fast as we can. There's a bit of work that has to be done on the permitting side relative to the state permits, et cetera. But once that's complete, we'll begin to we'll start investing right away into developing that project to get it into production as soon as possible. It is a priority project for us.
Okay, great, thank you. And how do you go about making sure the Rosita plant is sufficiently fed once you get that up and running next year? Is there opportunity to expand resources? Are you looking towards further M&A, even considering some exploration?
Well, there's a lot of resources close by that we know about that we are actually acquiring. We've focused on what we call the near term, the bird in the hand type of property acquisitions, but we're also working to expand that. And we've been in negotiation with landowners where we have known significant mineral resources that will be fitting into the pipeline. And we hope to have expect to make some progress on that over the next month to 2 months, but it's probably going to be January before we make some significant progress on that, simply because of the holidays. And then we're not ruling out potential mergers or acquisitions of that type. But there's fewer operators in South Texas than there is property and mineral resources need to be put into production. So there's a lot of opportunity really on both sides.
And just to be clear, David, we actually have acquired a number of projects, but we just are still in the midst of that. So it's a bit competitive to put out the map at this point.
Okay, could I ask if those projects are permitted at this point?
Partially. So in other words, they have aquifer exemptions in place.
Okay.
But they need and in some cases, the license at Rosita needs to be amended to incorporate them into it. In some cases, it's just a matter of a well-field application. And that's so we're balancing both, but we're not focusing on one over the others. We're doing them all at the same time. It's a full court press.
Okay. And how long do you think you'd be able to sort out the permitting issues here? And not that they're issues, but permitting here.
We expect to get everything done by no later than mid-2023.
Okay. So coming along. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're already in the process.
Yeah. Okay. I guess sticking with the permitting, how far along is the Dewey Burdock permitting? Is it safe to say you already have the federal permits, but you need to complete the state permits?
That's pretty much correct. Now, there's that caveat is that the federal permit, the license itself is being challenged, and we just had 2 weeks ago, we had a argument in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and the next one beyond that is the U.S. Supreme Court. But based on the arguments and the line of questioning, we feel comfortable that the D.C. Circuit is going to confirm and affirm the NRC decision, which will also, and these are not technical contentions, they're strictly on tribal consultation. And so we believe that affirmation is going to firm up the discussion, the process of EPA, so they can finish everything up on the EPA permits. The permits are already signed and put in place, but they're basically being held basically in suspension until they get done with their the appeal process. But EPA is holding off on their appeal process, watching what the NRC is going to do.
Okay.
So we feel like we're going to succeed, and at that point we'll apply for the state permits. And we've been assured by the state that it's about a 6-month process.
Okay. And just to clarify, this is really all about taking the regulatory process to task. It's not reflecting technical aspects of
That's right.
Correct.
That's exactly right. That's all it is.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good point to consider for investors. So, okay. Wyoming, very active uranium state. How quickly do you think you can get Gas Hills up and running, developed, and then beyond Gas Hills, do you see any other opportunities in the state?
Well, I'll kick it off, and I'll let Bill do some of that too, because he's been having fun in Wyoming as well. But Gas Hills, it will take, obviously we'll have to go on do some characterization and then apply for a license for the state of Wyoming. And there'll be some work associated with that. There'll have to be an aquifer exemption done, I believe, but that should be fairly straightforward given it's a historic mining district. So we expect that to go. I've kind of booked in about a 5-year window to get everything done, even though my expectation things will be sooner than that. And if it is sooner, we'll advance the project as soon as we can. But I want to build enough buffer, so to speak, into that process so that we can act on it sooner if we can. There are other opportunities in Wyoming we're also chasing down. I'll let Bill kind of take that over.
Yeah, there's a number of them. Some of them are public, some of them are private, some of them are parts of other companies, and there's still some opportunities on the ground. Actually, hard to believe at this point in the move, but there are a few. So there's a variety of things, and we're just evaluating them and take a good hard look. We don't want to put pounds on the books just for the sake of pounds on the books. We already have plenty of those. So it's got to fit strategically in our program and move things closer to production is what we're looking at. It's production assets.
And ISR only. So
ISR only, although if we get an opportunity, especially for very low cost for a conventional asset to fit into our non-core asset program, it's certainly not a focus, but we wouldn't turn it down.
Sure.
Find a good property and then put it in some good hands, possibly, but nothing to take away from our production focus in South Texas.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about New Mexico for a moment. You have several projects there, lots of resources in the state.
Uh-oh.
Dave froze.
Dave's frozen. There he is. He's back. Dave, you froze, so we didn't catch that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Let's talk about New Mexico here for a moment. You have several projects and resources in the state. Does the fact that New Mexico is not an agreement state keep you from developing those assets in the short term?
Well, I'll take that one just to start. It does. I mean, the reality of it is if you are not an agreement state, you have a bifurcated process where you're going through permitting at the state level and the NRC, and they are not necessarily in tandem. Here again, the NRC works very much on its own schedule. And you also have further considerations of the Navajo, a number of different First Nations, but the Navajo in particular. And it's, several different things. You've got to make it to where it is worthwhile for you to be working in their territories. So you've got some work to do there, both in terms of education and, eradication of some of the legacy issues that have been there from the early mining in the Cold War period. So yes, all of those. Our Crown Point is federally permitted under a license held by Laramide, but we've got the majority of the resource under it. But nonetheless, to try and aggressively push that without engaging the cooperation and support of the Aboriginal community would be foolhardy, and I think not in the best interest of our shareholders long term. Clearly, New Mexico is a long term. As Paul has coined the phrase, it's America's Kazakhstan. It's got huge resources, and it's certainly worth the time and effort to put it in and do it right. And much of our effort in terms of the First Nation will be patterned around the Cameco Tyson Majetic joint venture with the Majetic people in Saskatchewan, which has proven to be a very effective value-creating event for all parties concerned. And,
right.
So I think that it's going to take a different approach than the old approach for decades of it's ours, we're going to do it. It's not the right way to do business. So good neighbor policy again is the way I refer to it. It's pretty simple. You've got to want people to want you where you are, no matter where your project is. And so it's going to take some time to cultivate that.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. Can you maybe give us an update on where you stand along the line of uranium sales contracts? Are you going to need more before you start Rosita, or can you start selling into the rising spot market without largely being contracted?
The answer is yes. But we do have a contract in place. We have one that's with UG, which is it's a strictly a market-based or spot market priced contract that starts in 2023 and carries on for 5 years with a total sales of 2 million pounds. We like this contract a lot because it gives us no ceiling on the upside. Obviously, there's no floor, but I believe that where the prices are now makes a pretty good floor right now anyway.
Mhm.
And as a result, it's what it's done is with the current spot pricing and everything, it's allowed us to increase our tempo of activities in South Texas. So we're already advancing towards production to fulfill that sales agreement. And we're also currently negotiating or working on additional contracting with utilities going forward. And some are more advanced, and then some are just we're waiting on some additional requests for proposals to follow up on. But I would say that we're trying to build our contract book to be able to have a mix of material. But yes, we're not going to be putting material directly into the spot market to start with. We'll be going into contracts, and then any surplus will go into the spot.
Right. Okay. Now your current contract is with an intermediary. Do you sense that the nuclear utilities, the ones that are actually buying the uranium, using the uranium, are they becoming a little bit more aggressive?
They're not as aggressive as people might think they are. They're out there. They've been the first. There's usually a couple of utilities who are what I would call first movers. They go in and they want to be the first ones in, and so they can take advantage of market conditions as they stand when they favor them. So we've seen some of that, and we've had some good conversations with folks. But then there's others who just don't have any open demand right now until 2023 and beyond. And so they'll be entering the market, but they're not moving in right now because they want to see what's happening with the market at this point. Simply because, well, frankly, it's Sprott. Sprott's been coming in and buying up uranium, and now we've got other players coming in, and they want to see how that shakes out relative to their agreements. So since they're in no rush, because they're well covered for the moment, they're not coming in yet. But we went to the NEI meeting in Savannah, Georgia, and had several meetings, face-to-face meetings, which one were great to have again. But another one is that the discussions are far more productive and more back and forth than what they've been in the past. And that's simply because the utilities are seeing, the utilities are seeing that, first of all, the spot pricing is getting to a point where it's more reflective of production cost, making the conversation much easier for them to have with us. Mm-hmm. But also, as they start building out their strategy and the fact we're getting plant extensions, and then the Dewey grant program coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill also provides support for these nuclear power plants going forward. So they actually see a better future, and they're looking at and longer lives. So they're looking at contracting again, whereas they probably would have waited, depending on if the power plants are going to continue operating. So it was very good conversations, and we got a mixed bag on timing. But are they rushing into the market? Probably not as much as one would hope, and that's simply because they're kind of also trying to assess is a spot market real or is it not, and that's because when you deal with these folks, are just like every other human being out there, the fuel buyers, they don't want to be the one who bet wrong. They want to be the one to bet right. So they want to make sure that they didn't overpay when they could have paid less if they waited a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now,
I think it's also fair to say, Dave, that the Sprott and Kazatomprom Fund has accelerated their interest, not necessarily their need in terms of openings for delivery, but it certainly accelerated those conversations, I think, a little earlier than we would have normally seen.
Right. You're talking about the physical companies. You tested that market earlier this year. You bought about 300,000 pounds, have about 100,000 pounds left. What would really entice you to bring more pounds onto the balance sheet? Do you think it's necessary?
It's first off, we aren't a uranium speculation company. We're a uranium production company, and obviously we're aware of the market and we will take advantage of it. But our investment committee and board's directive is that we'll maintain somewhere between 100 and 500,000 pound inventory, not primarily for speculation, but a minimum of 100,000, so that we can meet those contractual needs once we start production until we ramp up to full commercial production, and that we'll have an uninterrupted supply. We won't have to go into the market to meet that demand. And so that'll fluctuate back and forth. Obviously, we'll time it such that based on our cash availability and needs, and the market being relatively over or underpriced.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A couple more questions here. One about the NASDAQ listing. What's the anticipated time frame from requesting the listing until it's free trading? And also, will you need to do a share consolidation for that?
It is, well, it's not a matter of free trading. It's just a matter of relisting. So all the stock would be tradable there. It's roughly a 6 to 8 week process. We're trying to get it done so that we meet all of the preliminary approvals this calendar year. And there are minimum listing requirements. Those will have to be met, in the, I guess, 5 days preceding listing, something to that effect. Anyway, the last few days before the actual listing takes effect. So there will probably most likely be an adjustment needed, but probably a small one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you have a fairly large experienced leadership team. Do you think you're completely staffed up right now to move everything forward towards production? Or, how challenging is it to find experienced workers out there right now?
Well, it's challenged just like everywhere else in the sector. The good thing that we've had is that, first of all, we inherited a good quality staff through the Westwater transaction. And also we'll be picking up some good people through the Azarga transaction. But as Dave, as you know, I've been in the business for a long time, and I've maintained I still have a Rolodex of names and everything else. Now, not necessarily all the phone numbers are up to date, but nonetheless, I still stay in contact with key people that I've identified that may be in other portions of a different industry that may want to come back in the uranium industry. And I've been successful so far in attracting a few of them. And I haven't been pressing too much because I don't want to overhire at this point. Right. But right now we've got the technical staff we need to execute the plans we have today, but we'll have to staff up more as we get closer and closer to production with operators, et cetera. But I've got a good workforce that can train people as they're brought in. And there's still ample workers that are available, just making sure that we can get a hold of them and get them into the organization at the right time.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's wrap it up with this. Maybe an update on Group 11. This is a company that Group 11 Technologies that's looking at using ISR for copper and gold projects in the U.S. EnCore has a partial ownership in this company. What are you looking for out of that investment?
Well, I think you can characterize it as a free call option, no continuing expense option, be a better way of phrasing that, on a technology that literally could turn the mining industry on its end. The promise of ISR, just as we enjoy it in uranium and to a much smaller degree, but also in the copper business now, with its smaller environmental footprint, it's just hard to compare it in conventional mining. They're so unrelated. You don't have the physical openings, you don't have the contamination, you don't have all the eyesores, you don't have all the most of the objectionable things about mining are gone in ISR, which is obviously the reason EnCore is pursuing it. But with as much talent as we had in the ISR, it was a natural place for us to go. We own about 30% of the company Group 11. They have a deal on a gold project in Wyoming that they have already taken samples of core throughout the deposit and submitted it to the lab for the first series of tests, which are underway now. We would expect to see some indication of those first tests by the end of this year. And assuming that, and they were selected from a wide variety of materials, not expecting all of them to be promising by any means. but to hopefully identify 3 or 4 types of rocks and mineralization that are at least permissive for the next set of tests. Clearly, it's a 2 or 3 year process at best. A whole series of tests involved with it. We're at the early stages, but certainly we've got better fundamentals to work on at this point than they did when they were first starting ISR, and it was simply a constant. I would point out that ISR has been successfully used in isolated places for gold around the world, but using toxic chemistry, and ours uses benign chemistry. So that's a real key to it.
Great. Okay, well, why don't we wind it up there? So Paul and Bill from EnCore Energy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. Red Cloud Securities will be back tomorrow. That's Tim Lee's going to sit down with Raina Silver. That's Tuesday, November 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.